Detective Lena Cross had seen a lot in 12 years on the force, but the call that came in on a Wednesday morning in November was different. The groundskeeper at St. Anselm's, an elderly man named Harold Potts, who had maintained the cemetery for 30 years, had arrived at dawn to find 3 graves disturbed. Not vandalized, not randomly dug up. Opened. Cleanly, carefully, the soil removed and piled neatly beside each grave, the coffin lids lifted and replaced. Whatever had been done inside had been done with precision. Lena walked the cemetery with Harold at her side. The graves were at the far edge of the property, near the old stone wall where the oldest burials were. All 3 were recent, within the past 2 years. All 3 were women. All 3 had died of natural causes, according to their death certificates. "Has anything like this happened before?" Lena asked. Harold was quiet for a moment. "Once," he said. 4 years ago. 1 grave. I reported it. Nothing came of it." "Who was buried there?" Harold looked at the ground. "A woman named Margaret Sloan died of a heart attack, 63 years old." He paused. "They never found out who did it." Lena looked at the 3 disturbed graves, then at the church beyond. Old gray stone, narrow windows, a bell tower that leaned slightly to the left. The church had been closed for services for 10 years. The congregation dissolved, but the cemetery was still active, maintained by the diocese. "Who has access to this property at night?" she asked. "Just me," Harold said, "and Father Doyle. He retired but still has a key. Comes to pray sometimes, he says." "Where does Father Doyle live?" Harold pointed to a small stone cottage at the edge of the property, half hidden by overgrown hedges. The lights were on. Part 2. The Cottage. Father Edmund Doyle was 71 years old, soft-spoken, and made tea without being asked when Lena knocked on his door. He sat across from her at a small kitchen table and answered her questions with the calm patience of a man who had spent decades listening to confessions. Nothing surprised him, nothing rattled him. He had been at the church last night, he said, arrived around 10, left around midnight. He came several times a week, always late, he said. The quiet suited him. "Did anyone else on the property?" "No," he said. Then, after a pause, "But I heard something, around 11, digging. I assumed it was Harold doing late maintenance. He sometimes works odd hours." "You didn't go to check?" Father Doyle looked at her steadily. "Detective, I am 71 years old and I live alone. When I hear unexplained sounds at night, I lock my door." A pause. "I should tell you something else. When I arrived last night, the church was unlocked. The side door, I always lock it when I leave. Last night, it was open." Lena put down her tea. "Open or unlocked?" "Open," he said. "Wide open." Part 3. Inside the church. The interior of St. Anselm's was cold and dim, the November light barely penetrating the stained glass. Wooden pews in 2 rows, a stone altar at the front, the remnants of old devotion, candle holders, a faded tapestry, a carved wooden cross on the wall. And at the front of the church, arranged on the altar with a care that turned Lena's stomach, were objects, personal items, jewelry, a locket, a woman's watch, a folded handkerchief with initials embroidered in the corner. 7 items in total, arranged in a neat row. She photographed everything. Then she ran the items. 4 of them matched missing property from the estates of recently deceased women buried in St. Anselm's Cemetery. Items listed as lost or unaccounted for after death. Things that had been buried with them, according to family records. Taken from the coffins, brought inside, arranged on the altar like offerings. The 7th item, a small silver ring with a green stone, didn't match any records she could find. She photographed it separately. She was walking back down the center aisle when she noticed the pew. 3rd row from the front, right side. The wood was cleaner than the surrounding pews, recently wiped, and on the floor beneath it, barely visible, a dark stain that had been partially cleaned, but not fully. She crouched down, got close. Blood. Old, but not that old. Weeks, maybe, not years. She called for forensics. Part 4. The name. The blood matched a missing persons case. A woman named Carol Veen, 58, reported missing by her daughter 6 weeks ago. Carol had been a parishioner at St. Anselm's when the church closed. She had no enemies, no history of trouble, no reason to disappear. The silver ring with the green stone was identified by Carol's daughter in a phone call that Lena made sitting in her car outside the church. The daughter's voice, when she recognized the ring, made a sound that Lena would hear in her sleep for weeks. "That was her mother's ring," the daughter said. "Her mother was buried with it. She died 3 years ago. Carol would never have taken it off. She wore it every day." A long pause. "Where did you find it?" Lena didn't answer that directly. She asked instead, "Did Carol know anyone connected to St. Anselm's? A priest? A groundskeeper? Anyone?" Silence. Then, "She knew Father Doyle. He officiated at my grandmother's funeral. Carol really liked him. She used to bring him food after he retired. He said he seemed lonely." Lena sat very still. When did she last mention visiting him? "About 6 weeks ago. She said she was going to bring him a casserole. She never came home." Part 5. The door. Lena drove back to the cottage. The lights were still on. She knocked. No answer. She tried the handle. Unlocked. She pushed the door open and stepped in. The kitchen was exactly as she had left it. 2 teacups on the table, hers untouched, his half finished. But Father Doyle was gone. His coat was on the hook by the door, his keys on the counter. She moved through the cottage. Small sitting room, neat and sparse. A bedroom, bed made with military precision. A bathroom, and a door at the end of the hall that she hadn't noticed before. Narrow, set into the wall, painted the same color as the plaster. Easy to miss. She tried the handle. Locked. She looked at the keys on the counter, went back, took them, returned to the door. 3rd key. The lock turned. The stairs beyond went down. She called for backup. Then, because the sound she could hear from below, faint, rhythmic, like someone breathing in short, shallow gasps, told her she didn't have time to wait, she went down. The basement was lit by a single bare bulb. Stone walls, stone floor, shelves along one wall holding mason jars and old tools, and in the center of the room, seated in a wooden chair with her wrists bound to the arms, a woman in her late 50s who looked up at Lena with eyes that had been crying for a long time. Alive. Thin, dehydrated, frightened beyond words, but alive. Carol Veen had been in the basement of Father Doyle's cottage for 6 weeks. Epilogue. Father Edmund Doyle was found 3 days later at a bus station 400 miles away. He did not resist arrest. He sat in the interview room and folded his hands on the table and answered with the same calm patience he had shown Lena over tea. He had been coming to St. Anselm's at night for years, he said. Since the church closed, he found comfort there, and then gradually he had begun to find something else, a purpose he hadn't had since retirement. The women he chose had all been connected to the church, all had known him, trusted him, come to him willingly. "Why the graves? Why the items on the altar?" Lena asked. He looked at her with an expression of mild surprise, as if the answer were obvious. "They were gifts," he said, "for the ones who came before." A pause. "I was a priest for 40 years, detective. I know about offerings." He said nothing else. At the sentencing, the judge noted that Edmund Doyle showed no remorse. Doyle sat through the entire proceeding with his hands folded and his eyes forward, the way a man sits through a church service, patient, attentive, waiting for it to be over. Carol Veen recovered. She moved away, changed her name, started over. She never went near a church again. St. Anselm's was deacon-sacred and sold. A developer bought it, planning to convert it into apartments. Construction stopped after the workers found something under the floor of the nave. The police were called. The site was closed. The developer sold the property at a loss and didn't explain why. St. Anselm still stands, empty, locked. The graves in the cemetery are still there, all of them, as far as anyone knows, undisturbed, as far as anyone knows.